This is Journey to Chinese Fluency podcast, episode number 11.
Embarrassing moment, culture insights, proven methods to achieve Chinese fluency. Skip that learning curve with the Journey to Chinese Fluency podcast. Now, your host, Victor Yang.
Hello everyone, Victor Yang here and welcome to Journey to Chinese Fluency. Today I am joined by Lawrence Farley. Lawrence is from Texas, United States, currently living in Los Angeles. Lawrence has studied Chinese for almost 7 years. Having just returned to the US and moved to LA, he is now doing acting, modeling, hosting, and writing jobs. Lawrence did some stand-up in China and plans on doing it in the US as well. Here's one interesting fact about Lawrence in his own words. Despite being 6'3", which is 192 centimeters for those of you outside the United States, and busting my ass for a model's frame is completely hollow. I am at best mediocre at all sports. Can't jump high, can't run fast, reaction time is garbage. Unfortunately, as a basketball enthusiast, every time I played ball in China with a new crew, we always had to get through the inevitable awkward moment of them realizing the tall, masculine American sucks. So thanks for the very interesting fact. Hello, Lawrence. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Victor. I appreciate it. And yeah, that is very accurate.
Great to have you here with us today. So are you ready to share with us your journey to Chinese fluency?
Yeah, man. Ready when you are.
Yes. Let's do this. So first, Lawrence, feel free to help us to fill in the blank a bit for the introduction.
I'll keep it a little short, but I am in 26 now. Actually, my birthday was yesterday. I turned 26.
Oh, happy birthday.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I am an American boy. I was raised in Texas, Massachusetts, California, Atlanta, and South Carolina. I was raised all over the U.S., and I went to China for the first time when I was 17 on a travel type thing, like just where we went over there for 2 weeks. 1 week we lived with a homestay, an urban homestay, and the other week we lived with the Miao people, the Miao minority, down in the south in Guilin. Yeah, so right now, and then I went to Emory University. I double majored in economics and Chinese. After I graduated, I got a Confucius scholarship to go to Nanjing University to continue studying Chinese. I did that. While I was there, I got good enough at Mandarin to pass the HSK 5, which allowed me to apply for the Central Academy of Drama in Beijing. I applied for a CSC scholarship, Chinese government scholarship, for that program, for that master's program, which was a television hosting as well as acting program. And I got into that, and I was there for the last almost 2 years up there in Beijing. And now I'm in LA. And yeah, I'm doing a lot of hosting, a lot of acting, a lot of writing, and some modeling. But modeling is really just to kind of make some money in between jobs.
Wow, that's an amazing journey you had learning Chinese, like traveling to China and studied in this very prestigious school in China. Definitely.
Yeah, the Central Academy of Drama, for those of you that might not know, is probably the hardest school to get into in the world. I think if you look at it from a raw numbers perspective, the amount of applicants they get is enormous, and their acceptance rate is like sub 0.01%. It's just ridiculous. Every year, once the Beijing Film Academy, the Central Academy of Drama, as well as the Shanghai Theater Academy, when they have like their interviews and stuff or tryouts for the school, it's always like a big news thing. Like you can see it in Chinese news. They'll be like, "Hey, who's going to be the next Xiao Xian Rou?" So like I don't even know how to translate that, but I
think it's a young, beautiful faced male.
Yeah, it's like a young male actor, but it's funnier in Chinese because it's like translates directly to like little fresh meat.
Yeah.
So that's the school, and then the school itself, like the school itself is because it's central, so it's government at least sponsored. It's affiliated with the government, so it's got good funding. And I went to a lot of college campuses in China. However, I will tell you the new campus, the Central Academy of Drama, is building in the Changping district up north of Beijing, is really nice. It's like comparable to a lot of Western universities. And since they're building that one, they're finally starting to let in more students because they were always infamous for just having like every acting class would have like 25 students. And their old campus is in Nanouguxiang, which is like the old Hutong area, Hutong area of Beijing. It's right in the smack in the middle of it.
Yep. So first of all, please share with our listeners why you learned Chinese.
So a lot of people ask me that, and initially, I don't know. I mean, initially, the reason I did it is because I had to for school. There was a language requirement, and as someone that lived in Texas for 7 years at the time, I thought Spanish was way too confusing. I thought the grammar was just like ridiculous. And so I was just like, you know what? These Chinese characters look kind of interesting. One of my friends was already doing it. So I was like, all right, I'll just start studying Chinese a little bit. And that's why I started. The reason I kept up is because I fell in love with the language. But initially, it was just to satisfy my college's requirements.
Right. So you started as a college requirement. So it's compulsory second language at school, is it?
Yep, it was a compulsory second language at school. I'd studied a little bit in high school too, but I took a long break from it after that and pretty much had to start from zero again in college.
Right. So basically you became interested in high school, and then when you got into college, it was something you wanted to study. So did you take Chinese as a major?
Yes.
Right. So after that, you went to China to do some further study.
Yep. So it was lucky because China right now, I mean, for those of you that don't already know that are listening, China's government-sponsored Chinese education scholarships and programs and stuff are very good. There's a lot of them, and they're definitely worth applying to. And that's kind of how I actually started to get good at Chinese. Because I majored in it in college, which, you know, involves a lot of stuff other than the language, like the culture and the like fiction and film and all this stuff. It wasn't until I was done with Nanjing for a year that I felt my Chinese was pretty good. Which means like basically like 4 years into studying it until I was like, yeah, I'm okay.
Right. So that's nice. So basically when you reached Nanjing, you're already at a very advanced level in Chinese.
Once I reached Nanjing, I was okay. Like you could say I was advanced level coursework in my college for sure. I was at the top level, the 401 that you could take in college.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, it depends how you define good. I knew some words. I could express myself okay, but I sounded like, crap.
Mm-hmm. Right. What's been your biggest motivation in learning Chinese? So obviously you studied in high school and then moved on to further study in college. Well, Chinese is a very difficult language, as you mentioned. So what's been keeping you motivated?
What keeps me motivated, at least for now, it's funny because I was just talking to one of my friends. He's in med school and he spends a lot of his free time studying. And he was like, that's what he loves so much about med school and that he's going to be a doctor is that he will study for the rest of his life. And what really attracts me to Chinese is that I can study it for literally the rest of my life. Like, I mean, I'm getting to a point of fluency right now where, if when I was getting an Uber in China, they wouldn't know that I was a foreigner. And like it often happens where sometimes Chinese people will be like, are you from Xinjiang or like what? Like, were you born and raised in Beijing? Like what happened? Which is nice. But the only way that like you can still be that fluent, but Chinese is such a deep language that you can just study it for the rest of your life. And that's really something that really interests me about it.
Right. That's an interesting motivation. So the lifelong study of Chinese, that aspect draws you to learning Chinese.
It's just like, it's the fact that there is so much out there, that I can just be like, hey, you know what? Today I want to start studying like Songci, and I don't even know how to translate, like Song Dynasty song poetry. I could just start studying that today. It'd take me probably a year until I could say I was like decent at it.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that. I love the idea that when I'm like 52, I can be like, you know what? I'm going to look back at the late Tang Dynasty poetry. I think that was pretty interesting and go back and start doing that. It's just there's so much to do within the language that it just feels like a big amusement park.
That's true. Please share with us your method of learning Chinese. What's been the most effective technique or method that's been working for you when you're learning Chinese?
By far and large, it has been parroting. And parroting is for those of that have never heard of it. It's when you hear a language and you mimic it like almost at the same time. And it's something I started doing about 2.5 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, probably 2.5 years ago. Because when I got to the theater, when I got to the Central Academy of Drama, I finally had a teacher, because Chinese people are very polite, right? They won't tell you if your Chinese sucks. They'll tell you it's great no matter what. And the first time when I got to the theater academy, it was the first time that my teachers were like, "Oh, your tones are all off. Like you need to like learn all of this stuff." And so basically I had to teach my ears how to hear tones, which all of you will as well. And the only way to do that is to listen over and over as well as mimic it. And so what I did is I just have a lot of the Chinese podcasts, which I have the old ones. I tried using Chinese Pod again recently, and it's gone to Taiwan. I don't think it's very good anymore, but I have a lot of the old ones. And what I would do is every single morning, and when I say every single morning, I mean every single morning when I wake up, I have soundproof headphones on and I'm listening to a 22-minute podcast about anything, about the ideal boyfriend or the ideal girlfriend, and I'm mimicking every word that they say. And, 1 week I'll concentrate on 2 podcasts. So by the time you're done with that week, with that topic, you're pretty good. You're pretty fluent. You can discuss it. You can write about it, and you sound good while you're doing it just because you've heard a lot of the words over and over again. And that would be my biggest suggestion is parrot, parrot, parrot.
That's a great method to learn. So have you been using that method at the beginning when you were just introduced to Chinese? Or
No.
did you use that method later on when you have already passed the beginner's level and you just wanted to improve your pronunciation?
So I didn't start doing it until I was already at an advanced level, you could say, until I was already at an advanced level. But to be honest, you should start doing it when you can, like as soon as you can. As soon as you're listening, as soon as you have like Ting Li, as soon as you have that listening class, you should start parroting because it will help you later on down the road. Because the thing is that is kind of bad about current Chinese teaching is that they teach you the 4 tones separately. And what they need to teach you is 16 tones, the way to put them together. Because Chinese is not only melodic, but it's rhythmic as well. And if you're able to get the tones early on, that rhythm and that melody will build very, very naturally and organically, which will give you a much better result. And if you try and do it later on, like I did, you really have to work so hard to almost reset your spoken Chinese.
That's a very interesting point. So you mentioned it's not just 4 tones, it's rather 16 tones. I guess it's a combination of each tones putting together in a sentence. It will probably sound a bit different to just pronouncing a single tone of the word, right?
Right. And it's funny because, well, I mean, this is excluding the relaxed tone, the non-tone or whatever too, which is which really should be considered another tone. It's actually the most difficult one because it changes a lot. But so like, for example, the third tone, when you study it, it goes like down and then up. But actually, when you say it, especially with certain other tones, it doesn't really go back up. And when you hear Chinese people speak, you'll hear them when they hit that third tone, it just is really quick and they kind of leave off the last chunk of it. Except for some words, though. It depends on where the third tone is in the word. And I find that very intriguing. But you learn that stuff unconsciously if you just parrot all the time. You'll start to just feel it.
Good point. Just like the Chinese hello, right? Which is ni hao, supposed to be third tone and then third tone.
Yeah.
But in real life, people actually pronounce it as second tone, third tone, which is ni hao, right?
Right. And so there's a lot. So those 2 third tones placed together, I mean, that's a really difficult challenge, and it will be for the rest of the Chinese learning career, just because you have to have at some level, like no matter how fluent you get, at some level, you still have to consciously be aware of when there's a few 3 tones that are together to adjust them accordingly. But I'm even talking about things like, I mean, so if you're from America, you have to immediately get used to pairing together the third tone and the second tone. And to me, it seems like the hardest pairing is when you have to prepare 美国, and like you're not saying like 美国. Like you're kind of combining them, and the way to combine them is very difficult. especially when you're speaking quickly into a sentence. And so that's what I'm talking about when I talk about the 16 tones, is trying to learn how to put them together.
Cool. So I guess the best way would be just, as you mentioned, parroting or, just mimicking the native speaker's sentences.
Yeah, because when you do that, so it was funny because I saw an interview that Dashan, Mark Roswell, I think his name is. Yeah, the Canadian dude that's super famous. He did an interview. In the interview, he asked him. They said something. It was something along the lines like, "So do you ever get like a tone wrong? Come on, you must get tones wrong." And he was like, "Yeah, I don't know sometimes, but like the difference is as soon as I hear it, I know that it was wrong and I go back and correct it, which is like something that we do in our mother tongue as well. Is if you just and you say something weird, you go back and you repeat it. And the same thing happens for tones in Chinese. If you say a tone wrong and you've trained your ear enough to recognize the sound, it'll bite your ear. You'll like, ooh, it'll nip you. It will not feel right. And that's the ultimate goal. That's oral fluency and Chinese, is when you start to have that.
Yes. So when you learn Chinese, apart from just mimicking parroting, did you also like try to memorize vocabulary or learning grammars and all that?
Yeah. So memorizing vocabulary sucked for me because the way I learned Chinese in the beginning, I didn't learn about all the radicals, and then to combine them together, I just was trying to grind characters into my head, which is really inefficient. And so the key for that is really just learn the radicals first, and then and then you can memorize characters a lot easier. You can memorize their pronunciation easier because many of the characters have two components. One's the one that represents the meaning of the character, and one's the component that represents the pronunciation, or at least the pinyin, maybe not the tone. And that's the key to learning how to read and write and to memorizing characters, as well as Pleco flashcards, which, yes, I do them. I do them all the time. I do them right when I wake up. I'll go through a set. When I go to the bathroom, especially if it's a long one, I'll do a few sets. And at night before I go to bed, I'll do a set, at least one set.
How much time do you dedicate to learning Chinese each day?
Well, the thing is now, because it's funny because Chinese people always ask me, how long have you been studying Chinese? And like, I don't even know what to say, because at this point I'm living in Chinese. I mean, everybody I work with is Chinese. All the work I do is in Chinese. All my friends here, except for like 2 or 3 people, are Chinese. So, I mean, it depends how you would define it. From the moment I wake up, from the moment I'm going to bed, I'm sending WeChats. And they're usually recordings. I read Chinese when I wake up, and I read it as I'm going to bed. I'll listen to podcasts in the car, especially if I'm about to meet with someone and speak Chinese. I'll parrot like a 25-minute podcast to get myself ready. So, I mean, it's an all-day active thing for me at this point. But it's just because my life is Chinese now. And to be able to do that, you have to be at a pretty high level initially.
What about at the beginning?
So at the beginning, it fluctuated. When I was in college, I would just do it. Like, I would do the homework I needed to get done, and I would prepare for the test I needed to do, and that was it. I didn't really put a lot of extra time into it. But when I was at the theater academy for drama, I'm telling you, I was waking up at 7 a.m. every day. I would practice outside my room for an hour, reading Chinese, like going through Chinese warm-up exercises, all of this stuff. And then I'd go to Chinese class, or I'd go to class, but it's in Chinese. At lunch, I'm usually eating with friends. If I wasn't, I probably had my headphones on listening to a Chinese podcast. And then afternoon was either I'd go work. So I'd either go record a TV show, a radio show, or I'd go to class. And then you could really only say the only time I was taking off from Chinese once I was in the zone full on there was on the weekends, like on Saturday, go out with some Western friends.
So if you start all over again, let's say, you're a total beginner. Now you want to start learning Chinese. What will be the things you're going to do right now?
You got to build a good foundation. You got to learn the radicals, and you got to learn the tones in the way that they interact with each other and not individually. That would be my biggest suggestion. Because if you get a good base where you know those radicals almost as well as you know the ABCs as well as if you know the 16 tones instead of those four, or if you at least have the concept for them. Oh, moving forward is so much easier. Oh, it's
Mm,
so much easier.
great advice. So, what had been your biggest challenge in learning Chinese, and how did you overcome it?
My biggest challenge was the tones. Just because, for one, I'm kind of a perfectionist, but I'm also in the business of speaking. Like,
Mm,
most of my job is speaking. I have to speak Chinese on camera, either in like a presentation type format or in an acting type format. And in order to do that, you need to study the inclination of tone within the tone. So like the tone within the tone, which is, I know I'm scaring a lot of people right now by saying this, but in Chinese, just like in English, like if you put emphasis on a certain word and the way you say something, it changes its
mm,
meaning. So like the easiest example that everyone always uses is I love you. I love you. Like that, that's
mm,
kind of two different meanings in that sentence.
yeah.
And the same as in Chinese, like 我爱你
Mm,
我爱你. Like those are like two. It's also a different meaning with
yeah.
it. And to emphasize what you want to emphasize, it's funny. You kind of have to put more emphasis on the tone, which is why, like, if you talk with Chinese people from Taiwan versus Beijing, uh, not only in the way that they pronounce everything is different, but the emphasis that they put on certain words and how they emphasize a point is different. And that's difficult.
Mm,
That's really difficult to where you can say a sentence and it doesn't appear to a Chinese ear, it doesn't sound to a Chinese ear like you were consciously thinking about it. It actually sounds natural and it sounds like you actually feel this way and you're not thinking about how to express your feeling. You're just naturally letting that Chinese come out. And it's that way, if that makes any sense.
yes. So, during your time in China, did you have to deal with any accent or dialect? Like you mentioned, you heard the Taiwan Chinese is definitely quite different to the Mandarin Chinese. Well, I wouldn't say quite different, but in terms of the emphasis put on certain words is quite different. So how did you deal with that?
First of all, Taiwanese Mandarin, and at least if you're talking Beijing Mandarin, is really different. They're so
Mm,
different. Uh, but no, so the tone, I mean, the accents and stuff, I don't know. I kind of just dealt with it on along the way, because it was good. Nanjing was good because Nanjing, a lot of the people speak pretty standardized Mandarin, and it's kind of a mix of both the South and North. But the greatest place to study is Beijing for the simple fact that that Beijing dialect very heavily influences what is considered standardized Mandarin, and it's easier to hear. Like there's a reason other than the fact that Beijing is the capital that standardized Mandarin sounds like that. It's because standardized Mandarin, you're able to actually tell what someone's saying a lot easier versus if you speak with someone from like Fuzhou or something like that that doesn't do that H sound, like doesn't curve their tongue.
mm,
That says like 是不是 instead of 是不是.
yep.
Like like that's already difficult enough because there's so many other s's and there's like, I mean, if you can't differentiate between 是 and 是, then you have like what, like 20 characters that could be what you're saying, even just the fourth tone. So it's nice to study in the Northeast, or at least in Beijing, because it's nice to be able to understand. It's better for your understanding. Now, I'm in LA now, and there's an unbelievable amount of Chinese here. However, they're from all over China. And luckily, while I was in China for so long, I pretty much spent every break traveling around China. And so I got used to hearing all the accents, and even came to really like them. Like I think the Sichuan dialect is really funny. I think it's cool. I think that Shanghai Hua or Shanghai Hua, Shanghainese, sorry. Uh, it's weird to say these things in English. Is like really, it has like the historical roots of Shanghai within it, because it doesn't sound that much like a Mandarin. At least it doesn't sound that much like an Asian language. Like sometimes it sounds like it has like European roots or European traits, I guess you could say. But
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
yeah, yeah, at least to me, that's sometimes what it sounds
All right.
like. And I don't know. I can tell you this much. I will probably marry a Chinese woman, as Chinese has already become, and China itself has become a very vital part of my life. What I'm looking forward to is when I do marry a Chinese woman, uh, putting in the time to study her, or at least her parents or grandparents, where they're from in their dialect,
Mm.
uh, because I think that is the coolest thing a foreigner can do is get at least to an intermediate level of a dialect of China. I think that's just like awesome.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I personally can't speak another Chinese dialect.
Well, where are you originally from, Victor?
I'm from Beijing, so I can only
Oh,
speak
okay.
I can only speak Mandarin, and the Beijing accent is Mandarin.
And the Beijing accent, which I just think is the coolest accent. I love, let me tell you, I love Beijing. The city is a rough city to live in. It's tough on just everything, just because the traffic, the pollution,
Hmm.
and all that stuff. However, Beijing people and the way they speak is awesome. It's so friendly. It's so lively. There's so much vitality in it. It's just awesome.
Well, I thank you on behalf of all the Beijing Chinese.
Yeah.
Cool. So now share with us an embarrassing or a funny moment when you were learning Chinese.
Oh, I've got a lot. Oh, an embarrassing one. Oh, I got a good one for embarrassing. When I first got to Shanghai, I think it was between my sophomore and junior year in college. I went there to intern for a summer, and I got there and I got in the airport, and my Mandarin was intermediate level at this point. I think you could say intermediate level, probably maybe not even there yet. And I get into a taxi cab, and the guy's like trying to chat me up. You know, he's got at the time I'm 19, I think, and he's trying to, or no, I'm 20 at the time, I think maybe, and he's trying to chat me up, and I'm trying my best to answer him everything he says. And any foreigner that's been to China has probably had a similar experience where I tried to put the seatbelt on. I tried to put
Hmm.
my seatbelt on while I was talking to him, and he just like he called me off. He shook his hand, like, no, 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 no. There's no need. You don't need a seatbelt. It's fine.
Hmm.
Um, which I don't know why Chinese cabs do that. Like they insist, like, oh, I'm fine, man. Don't worry about it. It's like I'm not worried about you, dude. I'm worried about the other drivers. So I put my seatbelt on, and he tries to stop me, and I said in Chinese, I don't know if I said in Chinese basically, no, don't worry about it. My teacher said while I was in China always to use a seatbelt, and seatbelt in Chinese is 安全带, right?
Hmm.
And so I said, but I didn't say that. I said 安全套. And I get it had just gotten it just happens sometimes in Chinese, especially with like 3 character words. The last one you'll forget like
Yep.
which one. Especially a word like Tao, which has so many meanings. So for you guys that don't understand, 安全 Tao is condom. So basically, I told this guy that while I was in China, I assured him, I said, no, while I was in China, my teacher told me while I'm here, I need to use condoms. And he like was immediately like, what? He like couldn't really grasp it. And he was like, wow, you American teachers, like your teachers will talk about this. Like, oh my God. 你们美国人真开放啊. Uh, and it was
Oh
really funny.
man.
And so, and I had to tell him, I was like, yeah, because, it's not safe. And he was like, yeah, you're right. Like, it's definitely not safe. We got to be careful. And it wasn't until a little while that I saw him, like, he was so confused that I looked up the word and found it and cleared it up with him, which was actually really funny afterwards. We had a good laugh about it.
Oh man, that was such a funny story because the most funny part is not just you mention the word and you continue the conversation as if you both understood each other.
Oh yeah, no, it's ridiculous. I can't believe that it happened, and I didn't even think about it actually until I used this app. It's called Zhihu. For any of you advanced learners out there, I highly suggest using it. It's kind of like Reddit, Quora mix of it in China. A lot of young Chinese intellectuals use it, and so you get a really good window into their mind. But there was a question on there that someone posted, which what's something funny that's happened to you while traveling? And that was my answer. That was my first Drew answer ever, actually, and it blew up on there, and I've used it ever since.
Yeah, awesome. So now tell us a success story, a most rewarding moment after you have become fluent in Chinese.
There's one that always sticks out. I was this was probably last between last winter and last spring, so it was probably uh February or March of 2016. I was in Beijing. I'd already been there for a semester and a half, almost 2 semesters actually. Um, and I was in a grocery store. And while I was in the grocery store, I went to get like fruits. In China, they have all the fruits out and you can just go get them and weigh them. And the person's you send you to go buy everything or whatever. And there was a woman, like a middle-aged woman working some of the fruit, like she was cutting off some of the roots and stuff and getting it prepared. And there was a male worker, a middle-aged male worker, like across the little like fruit table from her. And they were complaining about last night how they had to work overtime. And this guy was like saying like, yeah, I had to eat like dinner on the subway. It was awful. And she's like, yeah, I don't even remember. She said something and he left and she kind of kept talking. And I knew that she didn't realize he left. And I'm right next to her. I'm kind of looking for some fruit and stuff. And she's just concentrated on her job, but she's talking. And I kind of chime in and I say something like, I can't believe you guys had to do that. If it was me, I'd go on strike. I'd freak out. And it was kind of like a joke. And she kind of like giggled. I was like, huh. And it looked up at me. And I knew that she didn't realize I was a foreigner from the like 2 or 3 sentences I just said to her. I knew that she was just like nodding her head, like thinking that she was having a conversation with some stranger. And she looked up at me and this woman's eyes just got as big as her head. I thought she was going to freak. She was speechless. She was like, and she tried to like call
Wow.
over her immediately call over her coworkers to be like, you got to do that again. You guys, I didn't realize this dude was a foreigner. You guys come here. And by that time I'd gotten what I wanted. I was happy. Kind of put my headphones back on and it's just so I was like, all right, I'm out.
Nice. That's such a rewarding moment, isn't it? When you have people shocked at how good your Chinese is.
Yeah, I always tell people the level of shock and the way that Chinese people react to your Chinese. It's like kind of like an addiction. Like it's kind of like a drug addiction. And like when you are first okay at Chinese, like they'll all tell you like, oh, it's good. Like, wow, your Chinese is so good. Like, good, keep up the good work. And then when you get a little better, like you'll have some people tell you it's incredible and you'll have other people tell you it's pretty good. But once you get really good, I mean, you literally take Chinese people out by the knees. Like you just knock them out. It's so fun to just watch Chinese people try and fathom what they're seeing with what they're hearing. It's great. It's so much fun. I can't even tell you.
Nice. You're now back in the US. What are you doing with your Chinese now?
Yeah, acting, writing, and hosting. All of those things doing right now.
Awesome. How would you compare your life before you've learned Chinese and your life after you have learned Chinese?
Well, seeing as how before I started learning it, I was 17 or 18. So I was young, ignorant, you could say for sure. The greatest thing about learning Chinese as someone that is coming from Indo-European language roots, i.e. like European language roots, is that it's so different from your mother tongue. So once you get really good at it, it really does change the way that you perceive things. And that's what's really cool about Chinese and about languages in general. And so I could say one thing that's different about me now than it was then is I just view the world differently. I just view from time to seasons to pain to love, everything changes.
To be honest, this has been a recurring theme on our show. Like, many guests mentioned their worldview has changed. They see things differently now. That's definitely a plus to your life. So share with us one special thing about the Chinese culture that is different to your own culture.
One thing that's pretty different, and this is another reason I think marry a Chinese woman that will be better, is that the parents are so focused on education and they understand how important education is that they do not let their kids, not do their homework. I remember as a kid, I would try and get my homework done on the way to school and then right before we'd hand it in class, throughout middle school, at least elementary and middle school. And in middle school in China, these kids are already working until 10 o'clock at night, maybe even later. And I think that there's a balance there. I think that there should be a balance of relaxation as well as oh, you don't want to do your homework? Well, you know what? You have to do it. That's just the way it is. Life's tough. And I actually kind of respect that part of Chinese culture. I think that 凡事有个度, but I think everything has its limits.
Mm,
But yeah, that's definitely a big one.
cool. Well, you mentioned you really like Beijing. Is that your favorite city in China?
Oh no,
I'm disappointed.
I know. I'm sorry. There's just the traffic is too bad in Beijing.
Okay. Well, what's your favorite city?
I really like Chengdu,
Hmm.
Chengdu 天府之国. Chengdu is like to me, it's kind of it comes across as like the Seattle of China in the fact that it's the temperature. I mean, it's kind of like it's in like a rainforest temperature type situation, so it doesn't actually get that cold. Sometimes it will get hot and humid, and that's kind of rough. But there's just like the culture, the way of life there. Everything's slowed down. Like you see a lot more old Chinese people with their hands wrapped behind their back, like just walking very slowly down the road, like enjoying themselves. There's a ton of tea houses, which you can just go and chill and drink awesome tea for hours, talking to uh, tons of different age groups of Chinese people, and then they've really preserved their dialect, which I kind of respect. Because though it's absolutely necessary for a country to speak one language, I do hope that China doesn't lose uh, the many dialects it has, because I just think that's such a charming aspect of the country.
Mm.
And Chengdu has done a really good job of keeping that. Um, and I think that Sichuanese is just such an interesting dialect.
Cool. Chengdu in the Sichuan province, definitely worth a visit. So, is there a tool, an app, or a website that you cannot live without in learning Chinese?
Oh, Pleco. Pleco for sure, which I'm sure everyone's probably said before.
Hmm.
Pleco is big. There's another one called mdbg.net, I believe was what it's called. And it's a pretty ugly website. And it doesn't look like it does much. But what you want to do is if you go there, it has a box that you can paste Chinese in, and you can select that it only shows the English and the pop line, and so it's just the Chinese. But what it will do is it will color them. It'll put a color on all of them. It's mdbg.net, yeah. And once that happens, that's how you should be practicing your spoken as much as you can. Every time you're reading or trying to speak something, put it into that website, and then what will happen is you'll eventually learn the colors that is
Mm,
associated with a word, and the color will hook with a tone. So like for example, when I don't remember a tone, if I think back to his color, I would say at least 80% of the time I can recall the tone because of the color,
right.
because of this website. And this website has it can link the colors with the same ones that are on Pleco. It didn't have that when I started using it, so unfortunately I have to change Pleco's colors, which is kind of a pain, but whatever.
Right. I'm looking at the website right now. I just typed in something and like what
Yeah,
you
so it's
said.
kind of confusing. You have to click on top where it says look up Chinese pinyin or English, and then to the right of that says look up all Chinese words in a text. You
Mm,
want to use look up all Chinese words in a text, and you make sure that you show only Chinese inline details in pop-up. And that's when you can get a nice, sleek, clean, colorful Chinese like dictation paragraph.
nice. That's a good resource. I'll put that in the show note. So if you are to recommend to our listeners only one book in learning Chinese or the Chinese culture, what would that be?
Oh man, only one book. Well, here's the thing. Yeah, I have to do two because if you ask for learning Chinese or learning Chinese culture, those are two very different animals. Learning Chinese, a good book to get is, and this is more for English speakers as your native tongue, especially if you've read the English version or if you've read the English version, is Catcher in the Rye. Catcher in the Rye is a very popular book that we all read in the West in middle school or high school even. And it's where it helps that you're kind of familiar with the story. Because if you're like me, basically Catcher in the Rye is good because you remember some of the story, but you don't remember all of it. And so you go back and you read it in Chinese, and it helps because Catcher in the Rye is really colloquial. So you'll see some colloquial phrasing in there. It's not that difficult to read because it's written from the perspective of like a 15-year-old kid.
Mm.
And you have an impression of it already. So that's a good one if you want to like start reading a book in Chinese. Now, if you want to read a book to understand Chinese culture, the best one to do it is a Madman's Diary by Lu Xun.
Mm, right.
Yeah.
狂人日记.
Yep. 狂人日记. That's the best one if you want to learn about Chinese culture because it is a big metaphor for the blending of old culture and what at the time was perceived as to be the new emerging Chinese culture.
Yeah, Lu Xun is so famous.
Yes, and when you learn about Lu Xun, though Chinese people respect him and like him a lot, unfortunately, Chinese kids have to memorize a lot of his stuff, and they don't really get to enjoy him when they're younger.
Yes.
And it's a bummer because we have to do the same thing in the West, actually. So I would suggest either learning it from a Westerner that has studied Chinese to the level where we can tell you about it, or from an older Chinese person that was able to read it and enjoy it. Because most of my Chinese friends, they know about it, but they don't know how brilliant it is.
See, I am one of those kids who had to memorize Lu Xun's work back in high school. But I didn't enjoy the process of, memorizing all those texts. I enjoy reading stuff. I just didn't enjoy memorizing those for no purpose, just to pass the tests and exams.
Right, exactly. And that's the unfortunate part of the Chinese education system. Mm-hmm. But it's also, what are you going to do? There's a lot of people. How are you going to equally test everyone?
Yep. All right, now teach our listeners your favorite Chinese quote, phrase, or expression.
This is a really good, it comes from the Beijing dialect, but most of Chinese people understand it. And it's 我门儿清, 我门儿清.
Yep.
Which mer is door. And qing is 清楚的清. And it means like I understand everything. And a great time to use it is, especially as a foreigner, because sometimes Chinese people will not understand how much you understand about Chinese people, about culture, or the language even. So if they're explaining something to you that you already very well understand, like if they're explaining to you, like, okay, he's going to say this, but he really means this, and all this stuff, it's a great way to just be like, hey, listen, I got it. 我门儿清.
Yes. Nice phrase.
It can be used pretty flexibly. Yeah, it's a good one.
Yep, it's a good one. Awesome. Yeah, by the way, 门儿清, you got the 门, and then after the 门, you have the like after the 门. So it's 门儿, or 门儿清.
Yeah, so it's 我门儿清, and it's not like 混血儿.
Yeah.
Like 混血儿 is like you have to separate them.
Yes.
Because R in there means R tong, like it means kid. But here it's just 我门儿清.
Yeah, 门儿清. Awesome. Yeah. So if you are to give our listeners one single piece of advice in learning Chinese, what would that be?
Get a girlfriend that doesn't speak English.
What if is a girl learning Chinese?
Get a boyfriend that doesn't speak English, or either, whichever you want, or a really good friend. To be honest, I actually have never really had a Chinese girlfriend for a very long time. But I have a few really good Chinese friends, and that's really important. I'd say that's probably the most important.
Wow, that's a very, I would say, a difficult advice to follow.
It's difficult. It is difficult, but man, it will help so much.
All right, then. I'll let you pass on that one. So how can our listeners reach you?
If you guys want to reach me, you can send an email to me at... like lelalandstudios@gmail.net. Lela is L-E-L-E, land, L-A-N-D, studios@gmail.com. It's a play on the movie La La Land, obviously. A lot of Chinese friends call me Lela, which just means happy, and it's usually a name used for children or small dogs. But you can contact me by email on that. Yeah, that's probably the best way.
Cool. So thank you so much, Lawrence, for your time sharing with our listeners your story of learning Chinese.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it. Thanks, dude. I appreciate it.
To our listeners, the show note is now available at ChineseTalkEase.com/11. TalkEase is spelled as Talkeze. Do you want to learn Chinese for free? Start your own journey to Chinese fluency with my video lessons at ChineseTalkEase.com. TalkEase is spelled as Talkeze. Also remember to join our Facebook group. Just head over to TalkChineseCommunity.com. If you have enjoyed the show, please leave us a review on iTunes. Each month, I will choose one reviewer and give out a 1-year subscription to all my premium video lessons for free. That's it for now. I'll see you in the next episode.